Hello and happy Friday. Thank you very much to those of you who've already tuned in. I can see we've got a good few people already watching. Happy Friday and Happy New Year. This is the first broadcast I've done since just before Christmas. So very nice to be back. I hope you're all well. Hope you all had lovely Christmases, good New Year's, COVID allowing. And I hope you're all looking forward to a fun-filled hour of historical curios. Um, as usual, I'm Alex Cox. For those of you tuning in for the very first time, we do these live broadcasts a couple of times a week. It's a great opportunity for us to communicate directly with you, tell you what we're working on, what's coming up, what we're excited about, but also for you to speak to each other. So if you're new to these, if you're dipping your toes into the family history waters and you've got any questions, you're joining a community of incredibly knowledgeable people. Many of our regular viewers really know their stuff and are more than willing to help. So if you have any questions at all throughout this broadcast, whether it's about what we're talking about today, whether it's about getting started in general, whether it's anything really, anything at all, pop it in the comments and either myself or one of our kind expert viewers, I'm sure, will answer it for you. So what are we talking about today? Well, it's Friday, and Friday means new records. Findmypast Friday. Every single Friday we publish new records, and this Friday is no different. We've got some exciting new collections from Ireland, some updates from Dorset, as well as a whole host of new newspapers. So I'll be telling you about those very shortly. But also, the videos I do, the broadcasts I do, I kind of like to make them, yeah, as I said, a bit of a curio cabinet. Just looking at some weird and wonderful snippets of history found in our records, our newspapers, and today is no different. As vaccination is obviously in the news a lot at the moment, I thought we'd take a little look back at the history of vaccination, but more specifically, how did our ancestors react? When it was introduced for the first time, it was a completely new science. It was, for Britain anyway, it was a new thing. How did people react to this? Were they enthusiastic champions of it? Were they frightened of it? Was there resistance? So we've scoured, well, I should say my colleague Rose, who writes a fantastic blog for the British Newspaper Archive, our sister website, has scoured the newspapers to find a whole host of reports which basically show how early vaccination was rolled out, how it was adopted, the impact it had, and how people reacted. And depending on how we get on for time, we will have a look at some other weird and wonderful slices of medical history from our newspaper archive. So safe to say today's theme is very much medicine based. So let's have a quick look in the comments to see who's watching. Lots of you. Hello, Hillary. Hello, Amanda. Hello, Cheryl. Hello, Sue. Hello, Flo. Hello, Karen. Hello, Rosie. Hello, Linda. Hello, Ian. Hello, Amanda. How's my new son? My son is very well, thank you. Growing fast. And it's 3 months old now. He's a real chunk. Andrew, hi in Shropshire. Hello, Marion in Ireland. Lovely to see you all. I could spend the next 10 minutes reading through all these, so I'm just going to say hello, one and all, and thank you for tuning in. So before we dive in to the main meat of today's broadcast, I want to start by asking our questions of the week. We do these every single week. It's an opportunity. It's a way to kind of foster discussion, get everybody talking. And this week's question of the week is related to some Findmypast news. So one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to today is on our blog at the moment, we are running a new campaign that we are calling Staff Stories. And the reason we're doing this is obviously 2020 has been a tough year. The pandemic has prevented many of us from connecting with our loved ones face to face or in the same physical location. But one of the great things that we've seen is that a lot of people have taken it as an opportunity to connect with their ancestors. Interest in online research is at an all-time high, and we're at Findmypast, we're passionate believers in the many benefits of researching your roots. So we want to inspire others to make their own amazing discoveries. And we are a company that is made up of passionate family historians and researchers. Many of us, pretty much all of us, do our own family history. So we decided, why not showcase some of the things that our team members from across the business have found over the course of their own research. So if you want to find out more, Do visit our blog, which you can find here by following this link, www.findmypast.co.uk.com.ie, depending where you are in the world, /blog. And on our blog already, you will see a selection of wonderful staff stories. Who have we got up already? We've got my colleague Angie, who's written a post about what she discovered while exploring the history of our home. There's a blog from myself, story I've told you all before about my trip to Normandy with my grandfather and reliving his D-Day experiences. Jen has also done a story about how one simple search for an ancestor has unlocked way more than she could ever possibly expected. And our CEO Tamsin has also done a post about how she discovered that she was descended from one of the Mayflower crew members. So there's some fascinating stuff on there. More will be coming. We'll be adding more throughout the month. But also, if you visit our YouTube channel, you will see a video in which has been lovingly put together by Ellie, who I believe is in the comments. Hello, Ellie. In which a number of different people, myself included, Ellie included, share snippets of their favourite family stories. So our question of the week is tied specifically to that. Our question of the week this week is, what were your best family finds of 2020? Did you turn the lockdown to your advantage? Did you make any remarkable breakthroughs? What are your best finds of 2020? I can tell you mine. So mine was not a new discovery. It was kind of exploring someone that I already knew about, and that is my great-great-grandfather. Let me just bring him up on screen, and I'll just remove that. So this chap here with the fantastic moustache is my great-great-grandfather, William Arthur Crossland, who was born in Halifax in 1867. And he was a magician, a conjurer, ventriloquist. He did Punch and Judy. And one of the things I've really enjoyed doing over the past couple of months is following the progress of his career through our newspaper collection. And you see it blossom. So he started off running a very small Punch and Judy stall with his wife Alice that you can find in a lot of the advertised in a lot of Yorkshire newspapers. But over the course of his career, you can see by the ads he posted, the volume of them expands significantly. So he started putting out way more ads, which shows he was obviously making money through this. But his act diversified. So he went on, he moved on from doing Punch and Judy to doing living marionettes, as you can see here, ventriloquism, magic acts. I just love the way he describes himself. Praised by all, imitated by many, excelled by none. So he was as modest as his moustache indicates, which was not very. So yeah, that was my favourite find of 2020, kind of just exploring his career and seeing how it developed. And that later on he actually brought his son Arthur in to be the piano accompaniment, and you can see the show evolving through the different ads. So yeah, that was one of my favorite finds, and a great reminder to search for your ancestors in advertisements and newspapers as well, because you may find they took out personal ads, ran a business, or advertised their services in some capacity. So there you go. Question of the week was, what were your best family finds in 2020? But a bonus question, because we're talking about things medical, have you made any discoveries of a medical nature during your research? To answer these, just pop QOTW ahead of your answer so I can spot them easily. Pop them in the comments and I'll read some of them out. Yeah, so I would love to hear, what discoveries of a medical nature have you made during your research? And what were your best finds of 2020? I can tell you a medical discovery I've made. My First World War ancestor, my great-grandfather, Leslie Leonard Nash, is in a lot of our World War I soldiers' medical records. I found, by looking at them, I was able to find out that he was shot once in the right arm and gassed, the poor chap, as well as details of the treatment he received in the hospitals he was sent to. So there's some really interesting stuff in there. Right, before we have a look at this week's records, let's have a look at some comments. Hi, Chris. Chris says, Alex, long time no speak. Might not. Oh, sorry, not long, might not be able to stick around for long because she's off to the doctor herself, which is very fitting. Very fitting with what we're discussing today. Let's have another quick look. Yes, I can see Fatima's asked what we're talking about today. As I said, we'll be looking at new family history records, the history of vaccination, and discussing your best family history discoveries of the past year. Oh, Diane has already got. Diane got my first vaccination yesterday. Still, glad it worked. Well, you've got a lot more confidence in it than some of our ancestors did. So we'll have a little look at that shortly. Amanda's enjoyed reading our staff discoveries. Thank you. Very, very pleased to hear that. As I said, yeah, Ellie has posted the link for the blog for anybody who wants to take a closer look. And do check out our YouTube video as well. Oh wow, Joanne Moore. So her ancestor was actually a druggist in Brackley, Northamptonshire, from the 1850s. I'm assuming you found that through ads as well, Joanna. Quite the family resemblance. Do you think? Maybe if I grew my moustache out more, perhaps. Karen can see a resemblance too. Wow. Alex, with your picture of Chris Leno, can you pose it? Yeah, sorry, I'll do that again. Chris, that's what I should add as well. That's what I forgot to explain. Chris Leno was his stage name. His actual name was William Arthur Crossland. His stage name was William Arthur Crossland, but he went, his birth name was William Arthur Crossland, but he went by the stage name Professor Chris Leno. And actually, that has just reminded me of another thing I wanted to tell you about quickly. On the subject of magicians, with my ancestor being a magician, I promise we'll get to new records shortly. Actually, Sunday marks quite an important anniversary in the history of magic. So Sunday the 17th of January 2021 marks the 100th anniversary of, let me just get it up, of this chap, P.T. Selbert, performing the first ever instance of a woman being sawn in half. So there's P.T. Selbert, you can see him there, and there's an example of him performing this kind of monumental trick in the history of magic. Selbert was a really interesting guy. I hadn't heard of him before until I saw about the anniversary. So I wanted to learn a bit more. Basically, he started off his career as a spiritualist, where he did spirit paintings, and he actually fooled Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle himself attended one of Selbert's seances and was fooled. But eventually, when the spiritualism fad died out, Selbert eventually moved on to magic, and the trick that made his name was sawing a woman in half. So Selbert was born in 1881. His actual birth name was Percy Thomas Tibbles, and he got his stage name Selbert by literally reversing his last name, Selbert, removing one of the B, and then you get Tibbles. I don't know why. I think Percy Thomas Tibbles is a fantastic name, but he obviously didn't like it as a stage name. But yeah, he really, really interesting guy. He actually had a fallout with Harry Houdini. He had one of his famous tricks that he performed in 1913 at the start of his magic career was walking through a brick wall. And Harry Houdini performed the illusion a year later at Hammerstein's Ruth Garden in New York. And Selbert basically claimed that Houdini had nicked the trick from him. Houdini disagreed, and they had a bit of a correspondence and a falling out. But he's all over the newspapers. There's some really fascinating reports on the public's reactions to his sawing in half trick. And also, he was a very good marketeer. So what he'd do is, whenever he was doing a show in a location, he would advertise for girls from the district to apply to be the woman sawn in half. And one of the newspaper reports we have in the Daily Mirror explains that the interview process was actually, what was it? So hang on, I'll get it up here. So it says a report in the Daily Mirror, Tuesday, 18th of January, 1921. Stage surgery riddle. Many girls volunteer to be sawn in two by illusionists. It says the feat of sawing a woman in two and immediately reconstructing her is being performed twice nightly by Mr. P.T. Selbert, the illusionist, at Finsbury Park Empire this week. Apparently, the desire to be sawn in two is more widespread among women than one would suspect. Nearly 250 of them, mostly young, responded yesterday to Mr. Selbert's call for volunteers for his stage surgical operation. The selected girl, Miss Winifred Grace, was chosen because she did not flinch when a revolver was fired without warning behind behind her. She was placed in a wooden box, her hands being tied to her sides, her feet to one end, her neck to the other. Finally, 3 wide sheets of plate glass were passed right through the box, apparently through the body, by way of slots. Then, without delay, the box was sawn completely through the middle in 2 sections. When the halves of the box were removed, its occupant, in a semi-dazed condition, was lifted out uninjured. Miss Grace afterwards told the Daily Mirror, during the sawing, she was hardly conscious. I just laid there quite still, as I had been told, and I was dimly aware of what was going on. I doubt that somewhat. I actually think she was a stooge who was in on the act. But yeah, that was one of the ways he drummed up publicity. Pretty much all his acts involved an attractive female assistant being put in some form of peril, whether they were buried alive in a glass casket which was submerged in water, so not only buried but submerged alive. He did another one called a human pincushion, an illusion that's still performed today, where a woman was placed in a kind of Iron Maiden and knives will pass through. But yeah, great marketeer. One of the things he also did that was quite funny was he offered Christabel Pankhurst, the famous suffragette, £5 a week to be sawn in half, and this was reported by newspapers all over the country, drove up loads of publicity. Obviously, Pankhurst didn't dignify it with a response, but yeah, nonetheless, a very, very interesting man. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know that this Sunday marks 100 years since the woman was sawn in half for a magic performance. First time in history. So let's have another quick look at oh yeah, sorry, someone's saying, can we remove the ticker? Ticker is gone. Let's have a quick look at comments before we take a look at this week's records. Sylvia Valentine's watching. I'm very pleased you're watching, Sylvia. Sylvia says, a special day for me today. My father would have been 100, but also I have on good authority that Sylvia, what Sylvia doesn't know about the history of vaccination probably isn't worth knowing. Sylvia's done loads of in-depth research into early vaccination records. I think I spotted you in the newspapers recently actually talking about this, Sylvia. So yeah, if anyone's got any, sorry to put you on the spot, but if anyone's got any questions about vaccination, Sylvia is the person to ask. Joe Ledger said, RE question of the week, found my gateway ancestor to found my gateway ancestor to nobility and traced back to Alfred the Great. That is rather impressive. Great name, Alfred. It's what I called my son. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Victoria saying the same side parting and eyebrows. Kathy Mulligan Wiseman said, broke through one brick wall, found the German town names of 2 others. That's a good one. Jacqueline Dawson said, I found some quite shocking information from the newspaper archives about my 4 times great-grandmother from Ireland who moved to Dundee. She was a prolific thief, liked to drink, and the police raided her house often, and she ran a brothel. Wow, she sounds like she'd be a good character for a book. She died in Perth prison. That's certainly an eventful life. Amanda Webb said, question of week 2, my direct ancestor was Walter de Pechale, a doctor in the 1100s, wow, who's taken to war by the King of England. Amanda, you've got some amazing ancestors every single week. I don't know where you keep getting them from. Cheryl Martin Levy, didn't realise my great-grandfather died of influenza in 1918, overlooked until now. Tragic, but yeah, obviously one of the many, many victims of the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Lynn Marie Alex, question of the week, confirmed our family link with a well-known American frontiersman, Daniel Boone. Oh, Daniel Boone, yeah, I'm English and I know about him. That's a brilliant link. Keep these coming, guys. Do let us know. Remember, questions of the week were, just to get them back on screen again. Number 1, what are your best family finds of 2020? And number 2, have you made any discoveries of a medical nature during the course of your research? Right, I think it is time. I should probably have a quick look at records. As I said, do keep the comments coming in because I'm gonna keep on dipping back into them, and Ellie is also on hand answering them. But right, records. What have we got this week? What is new at Findmypast this week? Well, quite a lot, you will be pleased to hear. If you want to know more about what we've added in detail, do visit the latest record, the What's New, the What's New section of our blog, where we post a weekly roundup every Friday. And you can have a look back at everything we've added over the past couple of years. It's a lot, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, I imagine. But anyway, what's new this week? So first up, We have a new collection of cemetery burials, so Ireland, Londonderry, Derry city burials, spanning from 1853 to 1961. So this collection is pretty big. It's about 70,000 Derry burials, and you will be able to find out quite a few things in there. Actually, some of these records are surprisingly detailed for cemetery records. So you will find, obviously, the name of the deceased, the name of their parents, their place of birth, their address, their age, as well as the information you'd expect to find: date of death, date of burial, the location of the grave. So yeah, as well as finding out exactly when they died and where they were laid to rest, you will find important biographical details, such as where they were living, their age at the time of death. Their place of birth comes in very handy, especially if you're desperately trying to track down a birth record, and the names of their parents, which is even more handy if you're trying to track down a birth record. And the cemetery itself actually has someone quite interesting in it who we found in the record. So quickly get this up on screen. So this is, oh, sorry, let me just remove the banner so you can see it properly. This is Cecil Frances Alexander, and she is buried in Derry City Cemetery. Derry City Cemetery was, I think it was opened in 1853. It became the first municipal cemetery in the city. So, of course, a lot of notable figures from that area are buried there, including some recent ones. So Martin McGuinness is actually buried in this cemetery, as is John Hume, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who played a very prominent role in ending the Troubles. But the lady I actually have up on screen, Cecil Frances Alexander, was a very famous Anglo-Irish hymn writer who's actually responsible for some of the most recognizable hymns. She wrote All Things Bright and Beautiful. All Things Bright and Beautiful. We all know that one. There is a Green Hill Far Away, and also the Christmas Carol, Once in Royal David City. So very accomplished, and you will find her in these records. There's an image of the cemetery there. So yeah, check them out if you've got ancestors buried in Derry. So what else have we got this week? We also have Ireland Dublin City Cemetery Burials, 1805 to 2006. This is another new collection that currently covers 3 cemeteries: St John the Baptist, which is on Castle Avenue in Clontarf, Drimnar, or sorry for my pronunciations, Drimnar or Bluebell Cemetery on the Old Naas Road in Dublin, and St Canice's in Finglas. Again, I apologise if my pronunciations were all over the shop. So yeah, that's what we've got new to search this week for in Ireland Dublin City Burials. We've also added over 29,000 new burial records from 3 parishes to our collection of Dorset burials. So if you've got Dorset ancestors who lived in the vicinity of Morecambe Regis, Weymouth or Wick Regis, you may find them in the records we've added this week. And last but not least, we've added 3 new newspapers. We add new newspapers and we add additions to existing titles every single week. This week's no different. We've added the Westminster and Pimlico News, which covers 1887 to 1949, the Stapleford and Sandy Acre News covering 1919 to 1984, and the Bromsgrove Gleaner covering 1854 to 1857. So that is what's new this week. I hope some of you will find some brick wall busters in there. That's the great thing about adding new records every week. It means new opportunities for discovery. No matter how niche or small a record set may seem, for someone, it may just contain the crucial bit of missing information that they've desperately been trying to get their hands on. So before I quickly have another look at the comments, going back to the Star Stories campaign we're running on our blog, as I said, we want to celebrate a lot of the amazing family history discoveries that were made during lockdown, not just our own, but we'd really, really love to hear from you. So thank you to everybody who's also submitting their best discoveries of 2020 in the comments. But if you've made a discovery that you'd be happy for Findmypast to share on our blog, on social media, whether you'd be happy to join our cause of championing benefits of online family history research, we'd be very, that's not the right one, we'd be very, very grateful if you could send in any discoveries you'd be happy to be shared to a new inbox we've set up, discoveries@findmypast.com. leave that up for a second if you want to note it down. But just to repeat, if you've made any amazing discoveries that you'd be happy to share with us, and then happy for us to share with others, please do send them in to discoveries@findmypast.com. All right, before we start looking at the history of vaccines, let's have another quick look at the comments. Oh, someone else as well. Karen Alcott, her great-grandfather also died in 1918 from the Spanish flu pandemic. Very sad. It claimed a lot of lives, and it was one of those things that was kind of largely ignored at the time because the First World War was still raging at the start of it. So Angela Weston Dunn said, question of the week, I traced my father's family from Dublin back to Enniscorthy, Wexford area, and also found out that my great-great-grandfather possibly died from an accident to his head in South Dublin. He was a coachman, and several days before he died of a syncope. Oh, wow. And newspapers can reveal fascinating details like this. That's why it's always important to, I think, whenever you find a new ancestor, pop their name in a newspaper search. It's so worth doing. Sue Moon Warner has said, question of the week, finding this, so this is in answer to her best find of 2020, finding the probate of my 2x great-grandfather, which led to a newspaper report. I've been searching for many years for birth-death records. Now I just have to look for his birth. That's a great result, and good luck finding the birth. Do let us know if you find it. Betty Ann said, thanks to Find My Past records, I found my great-great-grandparents from County Down. So many thanks. Well, you're welcome. We're very glad, and thank you for sharing it with us. We'll come back to comments. I think I'm already nearly halfway through my allotted hour, so I really should start looking at vaccinations. Right. So let me just remove that. So early vaccination. How did our ancestors react? Again, I've got to give credit for this research to Rose at the British Newspaper Archive. Do check out the British Newspaper Archive's blog. It's full of fascinating articles. And this month is medicine themed. So there'll be a variety of posts throughout the month on different aspects of medical history reflected in our newspapers. But anyway, contemporary reactions to early vaccination. What were they? What did they look like? Well, it all started in 1796 when the celebrated, I think world famous by now, British doctor Edward Jenner demonstrated how infection from cowpox gave rise to immunity from smallpox. This led to the first serious vaccinations in British history and represented represented the first step in the total eradication of smallpox, which, fact for you, smallpox is apparently the only human disease to ever be totally eradicated. So many thanks to Edward Jenner. There he is, the great man himself. I think that's taken from the Illustrated London News. But anyway, so what happened? What happened? Well, It, as I said, started in 1796 when Edward Jenner revealed his discoveries relating to what he called the viriole vaccine, literally smallpox of the cow, or more commonly known as cowpox. So he revealed how infection with it could result in immunity to this far deadlier disease, smallpox, which had, I can't overestimate how devastatingly high the mortality rates for smallpox were at this point in history. It was huge. It was one of the major global killers. Actually, the Royal College of Physicians of London in 1807 estimated that nearly one tenth, and some years more than 1/10 of all the deaths in London was occasioned by smallpox. And so it gives you an idea of how significant a killer it really was. So Jenner made his discovery basically by watching how milkmaids in his native Gloucestershire once often became infected with the mild disease of cowpox, but then very rarely contracted smallpox. So he had the start of a theory in his head, and the way he went about testing this theory is quite controversial by today's standards, I think it's fair to say. So what he actually did, which is very shocking to modern ears, was he actually, and there's an image of it here, he actually inoculated his gardener's 8-year-old son, James Phipps. This is an 8-year-old child, with cowpox, and then with smallpox. Phipps didn't, thankfully, Phipps did not develop smallpox, and Jenner's theory was proven correct. I mean, imagine if he had, it would have been terrible. But thankfully for Phipps and the world, he didn't develop smallpox, and Jenner's theory had been proved. So he knew he was onto something, and some 3 years later, in 1799, you find a few newspapers reporting on Jenner's book, an inquiry into the causes and effects of the variolae vaccine. And in it, he explains what the cowpox infection actually is and how exposure to it resulted in immunity from smallpox. So here's a little excerpt from it, from one of the newspaper reports here. It says, "The grand point, however, of this distemper is that persons who have had the cowpox and who have not had the smallpox are rendered incapable of taking the latter. If the cases related by Dr. Jenner not be sufficient to convict strict reasoners and satisfy timorous minds, they are at least more than sufficient to render the fact extremely probable." So this is only this is like 3 years later, 1799. Already we can see in the newspapers there was quite strong support for Jenner's new vaccine inoculation. Enough at least to satisfy, as they said, the more timorous minds. How did the vaccine work? So actually, I'll show you here. These were Jenner's tools of the trade. These are photos of the actual instruments he used. So used by Dr. Edward Jenner during his practice, lancets and scarifiers of gold, ivory, and steel. And the way he'd administer the vaccine was by making small superficial incisions in the surface of the skin. He would scrape some of the nastiness from the pustules that would form around infected small cowpox patients, place it, grind it into a powder, rub this into a wound. Pustules would then form around the area it was applied to, and from then on, the person would be immune from smallpox. So, doesn't sound particularly pleasant. Not quite as easy as simply getting an injection, like we thankfully do today. So yeah, that's how he applied it. And that same year, in 1799, you already had newspapers reporting on the happiest effects, and it was spreading fast. By 1799, it wasn't only being practiced in Great Britain, it was actually being practiced across the world. Saunders Newsletter, one of the papers in our archive, in August 1799, related how, since Dr. Jenner's experiments and observations of the cowpox have been made known, the practice of inoculation of the vaccine matter has become general and has been attended with the happiest of effects. The other newspaper reports showed how a chap called Dr. Pearson of Leicester Square and his colleague Dr. Woodville had, between the 20th of January and the 12th of March 1799, inoculated 160 patients from 2 weeks to 40 years of age with the cowpox. So this shows that the public were quite enthusiastic. They were turning up. They were, I think, maybe resulting from the incredible fear that surrounded dying of smallpox. People were eager to give this a go. The papers report that the most important result of these early inoculations, other than the patients not getting dangerously ill from the cowpox, was that not a single one hitherto inoculated for the smallpox subsequent to the vaccine disease took the infection. So newspapers pretty early on were saying, this works. It's out there, it works, get it done. Jenner publicly promised that his inoculation was never fatal. And other newspapers reported how it had been taken up by the first families in the land, and we know people watched what the upper classes were doing back then. And if the gentry and your betters were getting vaccines, surely it's good enough for you. That was a huge help in convincing people of its benefits, getting the upper classes, the first families in the land, to eagerly accept and get inoculated. So here's a quote. It says, "The mildness and security of this modern inoculation have induced its adoption by many families of the first rank, an example which calls loudly for imitation, particularly at a period when the natural smallpox is making the most fatal ravages." So, yeah, as I've said, once the upper classes were adopting it, the rest of society was keen to get it done too. This was the highest sign of approval. So I'm just going to have a glass of water. And in November 1799, Saunders' newsletter again echoed this approval. The writer remarked how the advantages which the generian or vaccine inoculation will secure to mankind are incalculable. It went on to relate how 3,000 or so people were inoculated in London and its environs, including the children of many of the first families in the kingdom. Meanwhile, in Gloucestershire, Dr. Marshall, not Dr. Foster, had inoculated upwards of 400 persons, the greater part of whom have been fully exposed to the contagion of smallpox with impunity. Doctors in Edinburgh as well were doing this by 1799. They'd made it known in Scotland, whilst two practitioners, a chap called Dr. De Caro and Dr. Ero of Vienna, had introduced it to their own country by inoculating their own children. And one of the things that struck me as well was that many places were offering inoculation, vaccination as a business, and our newspapers are actually packed with ads. It seems a bit strange, that, doesn't it? You know, Dr. So-and-so offers the best vaccine in London. And here's an example. So this is an ad from the Bath Chronicle and Weekly Gazette from the 31st of October 1799. And it's actually an advert for Edward Jenner's nephew, Dr. Jenner Jr. So it says, inoculation of the vaccine disease or cowpox. Mr. Jenner, surgeon, nephew of Dr. Jenner, the first inoculator of the cowpox, having had conjointly with Dr. Jenner a most ample experience in this inoculation, proposes to extend the advantages of it to the inhabitants of Bath and its vicinity. Many thousand instances demonstrate incontrovertibly that the genuine cowpox effectively prevents the reception of the smallpox, that it's never fatal, echoing Jenner's own words there, produces only slight indisposition, and is in no case followed by serifula or the other diseases that so frequently succeed both the natural and inoculated smallpox. So yeah, adverts for those kind of services are found all over our newspapers, which I found rather fascinating. Anyway, let's continue with our story of inoculation. So as by the 19th century, by the early 1800s, you can see that vaccination had continued to spread. It was being practiced on the highest mountains and the deepest valleys, right across the land. The Staffordshire Advertiser actually published in 1802 Dr. Jenner's instructions for vaccine inoculation, which reads as follows: to obtain the virus, let the edges of the pustule be gently punctured with a lancet in several points. A bit gross. It will gradually ooze out and should be inserted upon the arm about midway between the shoulder and elbow, either by means of a slight scratch, not exceeding the eighth part of an inch, or a very small oblique puncture. And this is echoed by other titles. So in 1802, the Hampshire Chronicle was reporting how there are uniform accounts from all parts of France in favour of the vaccine, which with successes being seen in Catalonia, Spain, where 7,000 persons were inoculated in 9 months. So spreading fast. And by July 1806, Lord Henry Petty, an MP, addressed Parliament discussing the success of the vaccine. He said it had, this is his own words, it had checked in a great degree the progress of that dreadful malady which had spread such ravage and desolation over the world. Again, another title, the St. James's Chronicle, quotes Lord Henry Petty again, in which he describes in 1799, it was generally introduced to America, and in 1801 it was practiced all over the continent of Europe with the happiest effect. So basically, one of the things we see is that resistance was limited. Most people eagerly accepted the vaccine and were desperate to get it. So Lord Petty also gave the House some fascinating statistics relating to the real actual impact of the vaccine, first from Vienna and then from London. So he said in the year 1802, the first vaccine inoculation in Vienna, he said only 61 died of the smallpox. In the year 1803, that number was reduced to 27, and in the year 1804, there were only 2. In London, the average deaths by the smallpox for 6 years before the discovery was 1,811. The first year, however, the vaccine was introduced, it fell to 611. So significant drops. It really, had a huge impact. And the successes drew support from Lord Petty's honourable friends. You had William Wilberforce himself, the famous anti-slavery campaigner, calling it a duty of government to protect the people from smallpox, as well as every other species of contagion or pestilence, as far as wise regulation could do it. Water. And this success just carried on. By 1807, the Oxford University and City Herald was reporting how physicians of the fleet and of the army have now generally adopted the practice of vaccination, with vaccination also being introduced into Gibraltar, Majorca, and Malta with the most happy effects. The exact same report also goes on to explain how the Physical Society of Guy's Hospital had furnished a testimonial in favour of the discovery, with the special diploma presented to Edward Jenner, which was highly expressive of his merit for the discovery and the candour with which he had communicated it to the world. So, as well as discovering it, Jenner himself was very actively involved in promoting it, spreading the word. So we've got a lot to thank Mr. Jenner for, I think. He was honoured by many people all over the world. He was honoured by the Empress Dowager of Russia, Maria Feodorovna, who favoured him with a letter fully expressive of her acknowledgement for the discovery, accompanied with a valuable diamond ring. And she wasn't the only royal. The King of Prussia encouraged vaccination throughout all of his dominions. And as to prove his faith in it, he submitted himself first and then his family to undergo the operation. So his subjects could see, look, I'm doing it, you guys can do it too. But it wasn't all plain sailing. There was some resistance, like the anti-vaxxers of today, who were not convinced. There were people back then who were suspicious of this. So the Oxford University and City Herald in February 1807 reported how, and I'll read the passage. It said, the first reports of the vaccine inoculation in London created violent suspicion of its efficacy, which was considerably strengthened by the insidious and malevolent industry of many artful and ambitious individuals, whose ignorance prompted them to attempt the suppression of a discovery too vast for their genius to comprehend. I love that. Whose ignorance prompted them to attempt the suppression of a discovery too vast for their genius to comprehend. Lucas Pepys, who was a famous writer at the time, in his report for the Royal College of Physicians, detailed in the Morning Chronicle how, here's a quote from Lucas, he said, a few indeed have stood forth the adversaries of vaccination on the same grounds as their predecessors who opposed the inoculation for the smallpox, falsely led by hypothetical reasoning in the investigation of a subject which must be supported or rejected upon facts and observation only. So basically, he was saying those who were violently reacting against it weren't doing so out of science, from scientific evidence. They were doing it out of fear. Sorry, I just realised it's got incredibly dark in my room. I'm just going to put a light on. There we go. That's better, isn't it? But yeah, so where was I? Oh yes, so I was talking about the early resistors, the people who didn't like it. Actually, one thing I should quickly add as well, though, was that inoculating for smallpox wasn't completely new. It didn't start purely with Jenner. It had actually been practiced in Africa and parts of China for hundreds of years. I think there's actually records of the Chinese practicing an early form of this dating back to, I think, the early 1500s, where what they'd do is, rather than administering it to a scratch in the arm, they'd create a powder and blow it up the nose. So yeah, while Jenner was the first guy to kind of really develop this and make it popular and spread it around the world, he wasn't the first person to bring it to Britain. That was actually this lady here. So the lady you'll see on your screens now is Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Great name, that, isn't it? And she is widely credited with being the person who actually brought it to Britain in the early 1700s. So Lady Montagu had her young son Edward, I think his name was, inoculated in 1718. So quite a while before Jenner got his discovery in 1797. And actually, in 1721, there are reports in the newspapers that show prisoners at Newgate were also being inoculated. Whether that was consensual or not, I'm not quite sure. The Newcastle Courant, for example, says the inoculating of criminals in Newgate goes on with good success and draws abundance of our young surgeons daily thither to see the same performed. I don't think we'd get away with that now, would we? Testing it on convicts. Members of the church as well were also a little suspicious. In July 1722, there was a chap called Reverend Massey, and he actually preached a sermon at St Andrew's, Holborn, which was described as an excellent sermon by I think the Newcastle Courant. He practiced a sermon against the dangerous and sinful practice of inoculating with smallpox. And he wasn't alone. There were the French were a little bit more reluctant as well. So in 1724, there were loads of newspaper reports about how the Parisian School of Physics produced a dissertation against the practice of inoculating for smallpox. You had an eminent surgeon called Mr. Dubois in 1725 who stated that the inoculation of the smallpox is a pernicious and extravagant practice. He actually claimed to be able to cure smallpox himself through a mixture of opening windows, shifting the patient, and changing their bed. Apparently, he'd cured above 1,500 people via this method, which I somewhat doubt. And you've got another report in 1728. The Caledonian Mercury reports on the illness of a son of Mr. Heathcote, who married the Earl of Macclesfield's daughter, having lately been inoculated with the smallpox. And then it was saying he's fallen ill because he was inoculated. And the newspaper actually carried a warning. It said, they hope that this will be a sufficient warning to our nobility and gentry to put an entire stop to a practice so fatal in our climate. So there you go. It was there were critics, but would their naysaying hold any sway? Thankfully not. So a lot of newspapers, including the Star, printed reports. So in 1806, they advertised 2 books supporting vaccination. One, a reply to the anti-vaccinists, and another, Vaccination Vindicated. So a little bit of info on them here. So it says, Vaccination this day was published, a reply to anti-vaccinists by James Moore, member of the Royal College of Surgeons in London. And yeah, Vaccination Vindicated, that was published by Edward Jones, member of the Royal College of Surgeons, who basically, these people came out as vociferous supporters. Journalists and doctors alike joined this cause as well. So the Oxford University and City Herald contained an impassioned plea in 1806 about the benefits of vaccination. It said, before we close, we cannot omit giving our opinion of it being the duty of every parent, indeed of every person entrusted with the care and preservation of their own offspring, or of such infants as may be submitted to their charge, to extend the beneficial effects of vaccination. Lucas de Pepys, the chap we mentioned before from the Royal College of Physicians, he hadn't stopped championing it as well. He wrote how his organisation felt it their duty to recommend the practice of vaccination, convinced the public may reasonably look forward with some degree of hope to when all opposition shall cease, and the general concurrence of mankind shall at length be able to put an end to the ravages, at least, if not to the existence of the smallpox. So yeah, that's basically it. But eventually, as I said, it led to the complete eradication of the disease. Thankfully, smallpox is something that's we don't really need to worry about today, largely thanks to the efforts of the champions of the vaccine, Edward Jenner, all those journalists and doctors who came out in support. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting. We've got 10 minutes left. I think I'm going to have another quick look at the comments. I did have some more stuff. I'd actually pulled out a load of dubious medical remedies in our newspapers that I wanted to share with you, because there's some really bonkers things in there. Recommending cigars for asthma and things like that. But I think we'll have to leave that for another week. As I said, January's medical month on the British Newspaper Archive blog, so hopefully I'll have another opportunity to share those with you. So we'll take another quick look at the comments just to remind you. Question of the week: what were your best family finds of 2020? And also, have you made any discoveries of a medical nature during the course of your research? Let's see what folks are saying. Oh, it's a good one. Linda Slater, question of the week. My great-great-grandfather in the 1820s got caught for stealing a coat from a local businessman. He ended up in the hulks instead of being transported. He was about 15. Wow. And if you've read about the condition on hulks, I think that was probably a much worse fate than being transported. They were dreadful. I remember last year we told the story about a gang of roving murderers in New Zealand who plagued gold miners on the gold fields. And when they caught the ringleader, he actually said that it was his experience on a hulk that led him to murder, because it was so horrific. He decided he was never going back there, so therefore wasn't going to leave any witnesses, and he started murdering to keep him out of the hulks, basically. Denise McKnight said, death certificate for my great-grandfather states muscular sclerosis, which doesn't match my dad's cousin's statement that he died after heading a football. Nothing in papers about a football accident. I imagine that probably would make the papers. So more Macclesfield newspapers, please. Watch this space. We do add new titles every single week. There may be one for you in the not too distant future. Hello, how are you? Said, question of the week 2. A first cousin a few times removed was a lady called Dr. Mary Lee Edward. She was the first lady to train as a doctor at the University of Toronto. She faced a lot of sexism. She ended up moving to New York. Wow, what an amazing woman. During World War I, she went to France, and she ended up earning the Croix de Guerre medal for her work, which is not easy to get. She was part of the American suffrage movement and seems to have been well respected in her field. You've got some amazing ancestors. I don't know where you find them, Anya. Every single week, bringing up amazing stories like this. She's incredible, Dr. Mary Lee Edward. I might get in touch with you about that, actually. I'd like to hear more. That's fantastic. Sheila Carlotta said, my medical discovery regarding a death in 1871. The cause of death on the death certificate was hysteria during pregnancy. Oh, how tragic. And actually, if anyone's got any tips for finding cause of death, I mean, burial registers annoyingly normally omit them unless they're India office burials. That's one of the great things about our collection of burial records from India, is that they would normally list cause of death, and you see some, diphtheria is common, malaria is common, but occasionally you see things like mauled by a tiger, bitten by a snake, crushed by an elephant. I think obviously searching in newspapers is a fantastic way of usually finding out cause of death, probably your best bet. There are other resources available that I can't quite think of right now, but if anybody watching has has any tips on that, please do share them in the comments. Laurie McMara Hines, question of the week. Found my great-great-grandmother's sibling back in Ireland. Oh, wow. They'd lost track of their sisters when they immigrated to Chicago. Bridget Wall Heffernan, 1856 to 1937, and Catherine Wall McGregor, 1862 to 1933. Well, I recommend having a look for them in our Irish burial records, particularly the Ireland Billion Grave Cemetery Index, because you might be able to find the exact location of their final resting place, which would provide you with a great excuse to take a visit to Ireland if you don't already live there. Which I'm assuming you don't, because you said back in Ireland. Let's have a look. Janet Sutton, question of the week 2. Medical discovery. Found newspaper items about the death due to suspected food poisoning of my late mother's cousin, aged 18, 1932. Post-mortem family information. Tragic, but very, very interesting. And again, this shows the power of newspapers, isn't it? June Colby has said her best find was the story of her ancestor William Kettleband. That's a great name. It's a brilliant name. Who was transported for the manslaughter of his son Isaac in 1843. Found him in newspaper reports giving great detail of the trial on Findmypast. Thank you for highlighting that. And wrote a talk. Oh wow, June. Well, I myself would love to see that talk. If you wouldn't mind popping a link in the comments, I'm sure many of our viewers would love to check that out as well. That sounds right up my street. Moira Bell has said, question of the week, I've discovered 3 ashes of hydrocephalus in my ancestors. One child, a girl, lived till age 5 in 1844. The other 2 died before their first birthdays. Wonder how common one case was, let alone 3 in one's family. Wow, that's, yeah. Not all, and it's a reminder that, not always family history discoveries sometimes can be a bit sad. In fact, actually, they were often quite sad. The question, Amanda, another great comment from Amanda. So, question of the week: two of my great granddads sustained leg injuries, which means I am here today. So this is what got them off the front, I imagine. My maternal great grandfather, Robert Spencer Brown, was a gunner in the Royal Marines Artillery. The cannon backfired and hit him in the leg. He had to be discharged. Injury probably did save his life, particularly if that was in like 1915, 1916 or something. My paternal great-grandfather, Albert Percy Graves, was going to emigrate to Canada. He went over and sustained a leg injury falling off a horse and had to come back to England. I love that. That's a great example of how 2 unfortunate events actually worked out for the best and resulted in Amanda being born. Amanda submits great comments every week. So, Amanda, I'm very glad your maternal great-grandfather, Mr. Brown, injured his leg, as well as Percy Graves, who also injured his leg. Paul Van Dudesen, Paul, another source of fantastic discoveries. Paul said, question of the week, I found this old book of my mum's. It belonged to an Alice Snutch. That's a surname I've not seen before, actually. My mum probably picked it up at the charity shop or was given it. It was the Radiation Cookery Book. Wow. Whoa, the Radiation Cookery Book for use with the New World Regular Controlled Gas Cookers. She'd written her name and address and the date, 22nd of October 1948, so I thought I'd try and find out anything I could about Alice Snutch. Did a quick search on Findmypast and record sets and found she was born 17th of July 1880, died 6th of January 1956 in Gruppenhau. Sorry, I can't do the rest of that comment, but thank you for sharing. That is brilliant, Paul. And I think, do we have time for 1 or 2 more? Oh wow, so many comments that I didn't get to. Sumo Warner said, my 2 times my great great grandfather mentioned before he was killed by a blow from a shaft of a cart. Oh wow, helping brother-in-law remove goods and a horse bolted. Information on death certificate. If coroner would there be coroner's reports anywhere? Good question. Maybe someone watching could help, but I think it's certainly worth checking the newspapers. And I think, yeah, sorry, Amanda. That was a strange one for me, wasn't it? Oh, thank you. And June has also very kindly shared the link to her talk, which I will be watching imminently. Right, I think I'm going to call it that because I know many of you will be heading over to Fiona's talk at the Irish Family History Centre. But before I leave, I'm just going to do one final call. So anybody watching who has an amazing discovery that they'd be happy to share with us for us to then share, please do send them through to discoveries@findmypast.com. In fact, there have been so many in the comments, I think I'll probably be messaging some of you privately after this because there are some real gems in there. Also, don't forget to visit our blog to check out all our amazing, incredible staff discoveries. Hopefully that'll be a bit of inspiration to continue your research and start pursuing new avenues. And also check out our video on our YouTube channel. Actually, if you haven't visited our YouTube channel before, I would recommend it. There's probably hundreds of hours of free video content on there. Everything from genuinely useful webinars on various research techniques to a load of my inane ramblings and more. So yeah, check that out. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you very, very much to everybody who's tuned in. Have wonderful, wonderful weekends. Stay safe, stay in touch, stay connected, and stay researching. God, that's a cheesy outro, isn't it? But yeah, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for commenting. Love doing these. Highlight of my week. And yeah, I hope you all have fantastic weekends. Fantastic weeks ahead and fantastic 2021s. Yes, here's to a better year than last year. All right, well, I will leave you to it. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye, everybody. Bye now.